Today, I have the pleasure of presenting to you the Ageism Group profile on Outback, Queensland, with a focus particularly on the findings from the Oldest Beautiful project, which was recently completed down the road here from me, about 170 kilometres in Winton. But before I begin, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the Iningdai people, who are the elders of this beautiful land on which I'm coming to you from today, and pay respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander groups throughout Australia. I'd like to acknowledge all attendees and respect their culture and thank them for sharing in the spirit of reconciliation. So to put into context the profile of ageism in Outback Queensland, I'd like to give you a bit of a snapshot of Winton. Winton is a small, iconic town located in central West Queensland on the lands of the Colour people. Winton is known for its rich history, unique landscapes and vibrant local culture. It's located at approximately 1,300 kilometres northwest of Brisbane, and the town is surrounded by vast arid plains, red earth and the distinct spinifex grasses that typifies the Australian outback. Winton has a storied past. It's famously known as the birthplace of Australia's unofficial national anthem, Waltzing Matilda, which was first performed at the North Gregory Hotel in 1895. The town is also associated with the founding of Qantas, which held its first board meeting in Winton over 100 years ago. And not forget, it is the dinosaur capital of Australia, as it boasts the world's largest dinosaur collection. The economy of Winton is driven primarily by sheep and cattle grazing, tourism and opal mining. The town supports several small businesses, accommodation providers and museums that cater to tourists and residents alike. Winton is a very close-knit community with a population of less than 900 people. Locals are known for their warm hospitality, their resilience and a great sense of outback humour, qualities shaped by the environment which they live. The town is a hub for regional events, including an Opal Festival, a country music festival, an annual Winton Outback Festival, and the Vision Splendid Outback Film Festival, which draws visitors from all across the country. And you can see how the locals refer to it as unofficially the town of festivals. Winton has a median age of 46 compared to the national age of 37. The number of older people is increasing at a greater rate than the Queensland or broader Australian population. And the population of people living in Winton make up about 25% in 2021, compared to a national average of about 16%. The statistics show that there are higher rates of violence in rural and remote communities than in capital cities. Older people living in rural and remote communities also have higher rates of social isolation and loneliness, higher levels of disease and injury, poor health outcomes compared with people living in metropolitan areas. These factors can increase older people's vulnerability to abuse and violence. However, what was particularly interesting was a comment made by one of the Oldest Beautiful Winton participants, who said, "The kids don't get into any trouble here, because if they do, someone would see them and tell their parents, and that would be the end of that." To me, that sounds like those kids have better neighbourhood watch than the local police. So, when looking at the characteristics of ageism in Winton, including the drivers, the Oldest Beautiful Winton report suggested that on an individual level, there was lower levels of internalised ageism in Winton compared with older people in Metro Queensland. When asked for their biological age and subjective age, the average difference was only 6 years, significantly lower than others in metro areas who were also surveyed. This is attributed to the valuing of older people by community members and to the get over it, get on with it attitude required to live in a very remote community. Engaging in physical activity was considered important for healthy ageing. Older individuals residing on properties were occupied with tasks such as fencing, branding, weed control, preparing meals for workers. In contrast, those living in Winton had greater free time and often volunteered for community services, festivals, to stay active. I'd also like to mention the availability and affordability of living and housing in Winton. The affordability can reduce financial stress for older adults and allow them to remain comfortable in their own homes. In regards to family characteristics, rural residents frequently have stronger sense of identity, family connections, and pride in their community. For older adults, the sense of belonging enhances self-worth and security. Familiarity with the local area and its people helps people maintain independence and confidence as they age. In 2021, the census results indicated both parents born in Australia was 48% on a national level, but this was closer to 75% for Winton, indicating a longer connection to country and community. Some stakeholders have also reported some disrespect and violence and abuse in families, including inheritance in patients and financial abuse by adult children, particularly around succession plan and handing over a family business or farm. There's also incidents of family violence triggered by the frustrations of living on the land and a higher opportunity to hide what is happening given the isolation and distance. Community characteristics of ageism in Winton show that being an older person in Winton is reported to be a good thing, with older people noting they feel safe and supported in their community. One of the most significant drivers of positive ageing in rural areas is the presence of strong social networks. In many country towns, neighbours know each other well, and there is a culture of looking out for one another. These connections reduce isolation, improve emotional support, and encourage active community participation. Lower levels of ageism may also be supported by high levels of intergenerational connections. Many rural communities foster close ties across generations. Older adults play a significant role in caring for their grandchildren or mentoring younger people through schools and clubs and sporting teams. These relationships boast social cohesion and provide older people and younger generations with valuable support on learning opportunities. And it creates a feeling that the older person can rely on younger community members for support. A quote from the Old is Beautiful project described, "I don't think it's the same in the city. People don't know each other, and they are too frightened to help. The young people here look after you. They can be the wildest of young fellas, but they will look out for you. Sometimes when I need help, I go into town and find a young fella to help me. When I see boys in the supermarket, I get them to clean my windscreen because I can't reach across. They can be wild, but they will still help." I think that experience is just beautiful and something worth mentioning here today. Also worthy to note, there's been a recent trend across central West Queensland with a movement of in-migration of retirees who have been forced out of metro areas because of the cost of living and inflated rental prices. Many of these residents have found themselves with renewed purpose by joining the local tourism association, helping out with Meals on Wheels, or even finding part-time employment at the local pub. Ageism characteristics in regard to community services. Winton participants reported feeling valued by their local service providers because they were known to each other. Rural communities often rely heavy on volunteers to keep local services and clubs running. Older residents play a vital role in this, sharing their skills and experiences over time. Active engagement through volunteering not only benefits the community, but also gives older people a sense of purpose and achievement. The Valued 60s and Better program includes exercise classes run by a 90-year-old fitness instructor, and this help expands expectations on ageing in positive ways. However, there were reports that accessing services in Brisbane or away may lead to ageism encounters. When looking at a government level, access to services can be challenging in rural areas. Many communities are creative and resourceful in delivering health and social support for older residents. The Ageing in the Outback strategy developed by the Western Queensland Primary Health Network is a regional plan for 2024-2026 to improve healthcare for older people in Western Queensland, including Winton. It is also supported by the Winton Shire Council's own Ageing Well in Winton strategy for 2025-2028, which includes a local unified framework for community and aged care services, focusing on dignity and inclusion. Both strategies are formed by community engagement and aim to address the unique challenges of ageing in remote and rural areas. When we consider the impacts of ageing in Winton, we can look at it in both a positive and negative light. The report indicates that the valuing of older people by the broader community had a positive impact on the experience of ageing. Access to positive ageing role models may boost healthy ageing. However, the get on with it approach to life may be a barrier to some people reaching out for support, particularly in relation to abuse or family violence. How do we respond to ageism in Outback Queensland? Looking at it through supports, there is a need to ensure older people are aware of the supports available to them so they can reach out confidentially. Confidentiality has been identified as being very important in small rural towns, as it often can be compromised. A need for more face-to-face, especially for people that have no computer access. 28.5% of the Winton population reported having no internet, compared to a national level of 14%. Support to remain active in their community in a volunteer capacity. Those that have lost their driver's licence are still encouraged to attend the Meals on Wheels deliveries as a passenger to get out of the house and feel needed. Foster a culture of inclusion and respect by celebrating the contribution of older adults through local media and awards and storytelling events. Winton does this very well from what I've seen by recognising their life members for outstanding long-term contributions they've made. There is an opportunity to increase the support to older people by raising awareness of what works in the valuing of older people to strengthen these approaches. Primary prevention. It may be useful to identify ways of providing information to older people and the broader community about financial abuse by family members. Strategies like the Ageing in Outback and Age Well in Winton are vital but need good implementation and reflection. We could look at building digital capacity, connectivity, as well as more affordable telecommunication options to expand internet access in rural communities. It's positive to note, but that rural and remote communities often demonstrate effective primary prevention of ageism through fostering intergenerational relationships, celebrating the contributions, and maintaining strong community engagement. To preserve and replicate these successful strategies, it's important to continue supporting social initiatives that connect people of all ages, such as local clubs, schools, sporting teams. Encouraging storytelling, community events, and shared stories can further strengthen the bonds and understanding. To wrap up, you can see there's something very special about ageing in Outback Queensland and the positive experience with less internalised ageism among community members. The value of older people in Winton provides an opportunity to learn about what works. A society that values its older people can foster a sense of self-worth among them. This does not imply that ageism is not existent in Winton, but it certainly is not as assertive. And there is an opportunity to focus on what works well here and ensure we don't lose it. Thank you.
My name is Kristina Chelberg. It actually comes up as Powery, but I prefer the name Chelberg if anyone's looking me up at some point. Unfortunately, my co-presenter and author, Kate Swaffer, was planning to be here today, but was unable to due to sort of an urgent family situation. So this is very much a presentation from both of us. And what we'd like to talk today about is sort of some informal comments about the intersection of ageism and dementia. This is drawn both from our research and lived experience. I am a postdoc researcher at the University of Technology in Sydney, and Kate is a PhD candidate at the University of South Australia who also lives with younger onset dementia. And anyone who's done anything in the field of dementia would likely know of Kate's work. So just a little bit of context. We know that older people living with dementia face what's called a double stigma of dementia and ageism. So they're this sort of multiply marginalised group based on the specific stigma of dementia combined with broader stigma of ageism. And this is against the background of increased prevalence of dementia associated with age, which also is true for women, Indigenous populations, and low socioeconomic backgrounds. And some of you might have seen recently in the news that dementia is officially now the leading cause of death in Australia. So it's this intersection that does affect a lot of people. And it's something that obviously we are increasingly need to reckon with, particularly in the aged care space, which is where a lot of my research has been done. So what are the characteristics of this particular dementia times ageism group? So we often see a framing of dementia in public discourse in very negative natural disaster type terms. So we hear about the dementia epidemic, even though obviously dementia is not contagious. We hear about the grey tsunami. We hear about the dementia crisis. And it really frames dementia as a particular kind of natural disaster, which is threatening both the economy, society, families, and individuals. And this dementia stigma is a particular form of dehumanisation. So there's often associations or descriptions that the person living with dementia is lost, they're a zombie, they're the walking dead, they're no longer there. And it's this idea connected with sort of Western, philosophy that when the mind is gone and only the body remains, it's just a shell of a person. And so this medical and some would say colonial white models of dementia as sort of only deterioration, decline and tragedy. We see this come through in contemporary film, certainly in news media reporting, and particularly in medical discourse. So there's this sort of deterioration and decline emphasis. We hear many accounts of older people with dementia as a drain on public resources, bed blockers. There's frequent media reports of the economic burden of dementia. And this is spoken about in terms of the health costs, the aged care costs, and also the care costs, which I'll come to in a minute. However, this sort of framing that is very negative and a particular sort of dehumanised representation of older people with dementia, this can be contrasted with alternative sociocultural perspectives. And it's interesting to note that in other societal sort of frameworks, dementia is not seen as this fate worse than death. And in some cultures, it might be just sort of a different way of being. And this can also be looked at through disability, queer and feminist approaches. So this idea that dementia is not all disaster, it's difference, but not completely negative, is quite an intriguing alternative way of looking at framing dementia. And we note that there's sort of this in Western cultures underlying this is the profit implicit, right? So we have big money being made on looking for treatments and cures for drugs by pharmaceutical companies, as well as a burgeoning dementia prevention industry. So I don't think you can go a week without sort of somebody telling you what the new best preventative approach for getting dementia is. And so we see this sort of increasing onus being put on individuals in midlife and onwards to do everything they can to avoid dementia. And lastly, we hear about this related care burden of dementia. And this puts people living with dementia in tension with those that care for them, who are often unwaged or low-waged women with personal responsibility to minimise this public cost of dementia. So this can be internalised stigma for individuals who may perceive that they've somehow failed in preventing dementia and are framed as a non-human burden on family and society. Within health and social services, we might think about the way that people, once they're diagnosed with dementia, are rarely offered any form of rehabilitation and allied health services. And this is inconsistent with the World Health Organization recommendations for people living with a disability. And we also know at a government level, who regulate the aged care system, that there's this sort of normalised institutional model of warehousing of older people in residential aged care. Within families, as we mentioned, care of older parents with dementia, because the aged care system is inadequate, this often then sort of falls to adult children who are often daughters, wives and daughters-in-laws. And this usually occurs at a time of peak commitment in their own lives, the so-called sandwich generation. And as we mentioned, this can put the needs of those two groups of people in conflict and require them to make really difficult choices. And it can also lead to harms for themselves in health, financial, and their own emotional well-being. Again, in the aged care system, we see this sort of entrenched systemic practices of harm, neglect, and abuse for residents living with dementia in aged care. And I would argue that this sort of acceptance of this or tolerance of this would not occur in childcare. And that's sort of picking up on the different types of ageism that we talked about. And obviously there's been some news recently about problems within the childcare system, and we've seen a really swift action on behalf of governments to take action in that respect. And this can in some ways be sort of contrasted with the almost resignation of, well, this is just how we do aged care for older people. And lastly, in the legal sort of space, we see limited recognition or standing at law for people living with dementia, and assessments and presumptions of legal incapacity, and that people with dementia are unreliable witnesses. And this can lead to additional harms, because where there has been abuse or harm, it can make it very difficult to pursue any legal remedy. And we also find that they tend to be excluded from opportunities to participate in aged care policy and reform, such as the Royal Commission into Aged Care. And so finally, looking at some responses to this, we see that despite the Aged Care Royal Commission reforms, there's been a failure to sort of deliver a radical shift in systems of institutionalised aged care. And older people with dementia, who make up the majority of people in residential aged care, are kind of out of sight and out of mind, and sometimes in specialist or memory care, which are a form of restraint. What we would suggest is we'd like to promote a call for radically reimagining dementia aged care that meets the needs of the majority of residents who have dementia. And this is estimated at approximately 70% by the Royal Commission. This shouldn't be niche or special. The system should deliver the needs of its core customer, who tends to be an older woman with dementia. And just picking up on what Kate was talking about earlier, it's said that this group have a triple jeopardy. So they have ageism, gender, and dementia intersecting in their lives. So they really are a group that need advocating and attention paid to the circumstances of their lives. Lastly, there's a greater need for access to rehabilitation and allied health services, both in the community and in residential aged care, to support their wellbeing and health. Many people live with dementia for a long period of time after diagnosis, and they're entitled to a full range of health services. So I guess that might be the last point to make, is that developing new approaches to recognise and support agency and self-determination for older people with dementia. So not allowing concerns about legal capacity to necessarily be conflated with their capability or a presumed incapacity to share the experiences and perspective on their lives well lived.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. I'm coming to you today from the unceded lands of the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people and speaking on behalf of our participant who has elected to remain anonymous. I'll begin reading her statement. I was born in a Muslim household. It was a cosmopolitan household, and I went to a Christian school. We were taught about the culture of Islam by my grandmother. She was a teacher herself. My friends were Catholics, Hindus, Parsis, and of many other faiths. We never saw religion as a dividing force. At school, we would get food from home and we shared lunch boxes and celebrated in each other's festivals. I still have all my friends from school. I've stopped dyeing my hair and I'm in that era of having great grey streaks in my hair. People tell me I look better than I did before. Other people may see me as old, but I'm still capable of doing what a young person does, at a slower pace. I grew up in an intergenerational household. When I came home from school, I had to go and see my grandmother first, to tell her what I had done for the day. If we didn't do that, she would tell us we were not valuing her. She was the family matriarch. She controlled all of us, even my dad and uncles. Within immediate family, there is a lot of respect for older people. We look after our older people. There is a circle of caring and sharing the care. I think the children are not as valuing of older people as we were. I think that is partly because of nuclear families, not as connected to extended families. Also, they are influenced by Western values, which is more ageist, and therefore young people are not as connected to older people in their families. Some people bring their parents from overseas because they want their parents as child support. That can be difficult because the older person is at a later stage of their lives, and when they come to Australia, they have left their friends behind and they become dependent on their children for language, transport, and a culture that they have to understand. They therefore become isolated. I know someone who brought their mother to Australia from overseas. They were living in a 4-bedroom home with 3 children. The children were prioritised over the needs of their mother. The mother sold everything to come to Australia. That meant she couldn't go back. The grandmother didn't understand her grandchildren's Western values, and the grandchildren thought she wanted to know too much. It created difficulties between them, but they loved her. By the time the children left home, their grandmother was in a nursing home. There is a big contrast between my experience living with my grandmother, who was the central figure in our lives, and what I've observed here. I will not say that this is the influence of only Western values, but I believe that if I was in a similar situation as my friend, perhaps I would have influenced my children to be more accommodating to their grandmother. Every family dynamic is different. Everyone's journey is also different. I had a job that I loved until I was 60 years old, and then they did a restructure and I lost my job. I applied for many jobs after that. I had a good position in my previous work and I have a good education, but I was always rejected. I think it was ageism. I went back and studied to try to increase my chances of getting work. In the course I studied, I was treated like a 15-year-old. In my work placement, I wasn't given many opportunities until they saw I could write well, and then they gave me all the writing tasks. They wouldn't recognise my other skills. I eventually applied for a job at that organisation and I was not successful. So there again is ageism. After years of trying, I'm now doing voluntary roles, and I hope that this work will lead to paid employment. In Muslim culture, we have a lot of respect for our parents and for older people. When an older person walks into a room, we stand up and kiss their hand. It's a way of saying hello, like a hug, but it is a sign of respect. Going to the mosque is a community thing. We pray on the ground, and so there are chairs for people to sit who have less mobility. The chairs are in a section for older people, and the younger generation sit together in another section. When I see people sitting on the chairs, I will always go and greet them and ask how they are. The young people, because they are with their friends or they are keeping an eye on their children and building their social connections, their interactions are limited with older people. They will help if they need to. They're not as conscious of connecting with older people. I think we need more seminars and education about ageism. I would also like to see more events between childcare centres and older people in aged care homes. It's important for younger people to see how older people live. For older people who are not in nursing homes, there could be more community events like picnics, dances and games where older people are paired with teenagers and youth. I see less respect in broader community. When I go to a friend's home for an event, we get segregated by age. The young people go out into the garden and the older people sit inside talking politics. The younger people will come in for 5 minutes to say hello, but not for a longer chat. There is definitely that divide between different age groups. It happens automatically. The young people might think they don't have anything to talk to the older person about. To prevent ageism, we need to make connections between older and younger people. This is not just about Islamic faith, it's about broader respect for older people in Australian culture. Thank you for listening today.
Thank you, everyone. And I'm coming to you from the traditional lands of the Yagara and Turrbal people in Brisbane. And James and I had a conversation yesterday preparing this. And I said, we should just have a conversation. I'm speaking to you from a metropolitan experience, and James is in North Queensland. You see, my backdrop is the Queensland Seniors Calendar for next year, which was launched yesterday. And I'm the pin-up person for March. But what I'm really proud of is I'm there holding the rainbow fan with the transgender symbol included. And the fact that as an older gay man, my presence is shared in this community, for me, is a significant statement. Since working with Catherine, I've done a lot of reflection on ageism. It's not a personal experience as a 72-year-old, but it's helped me focus on my peers in the community, especially older gay men. And there are quite a number of venues where they would gather as groups, but I'm not so sure that those peers would feel comfortable or welcome outside the safe venues. I was really interested when Catherine began the process today with identifying and claiming this as a safe space for everyone. A few years ago, and it probably happened in other cities, there's a whole drive to have safe place rainbows in businesses, etc., declaring that these venues would be a safe place for LGBTIQ plus people. One of the observations I have is that a lot of my generation in the metropolitan area will go to the well-known queer venues for socializing. I live in an area with a sports club and a bowling club nearby. I happily go along because I've been doing PR work and been out and about in the media for a while, and I feel comfortable. But I'm very aware that I'm not so sure my peers would feel comfortable going into a space if they didn't know it was safe. If there wasn't something there that said, you are welcome here as a LGBTIQ queer identifying person and as an older person. So that's one of the campaigns I'm sort of thinking of now, is inviting the clubs that I belong to identify as safe places for my peers as older gay men. And one of the things I discovered with James as we conversed was there's a number of opportunities for my peers, my older gay peers, to gather socially. Those opportunities aren't necessarily available in remote areas. So James, would you like to pick up the conversation at that point?
Okay, thank you. So these are just some sort of random reflections on the same but different theme. I think in so many ways, older gay men are the same as older people, other groupings of older people. I mean, we seek validation. We want our lives to be meaningful. We want to be of service to the community in some meaningful way. I think, like so many other older people, we're at this interesting stage in our lives where we're perhaps the most fully realised version of ourselves that we may have been this lifetime, but just at this point of feeling, fully realised. The physical self is undergoing change, and it's about we dance the dance around how do we not let the physical changes overwhelm everything else that's positive that's going on for us. I think that's so important in the gay community. When we think about gay culture, most people would think about, let's say, the Sydney Gay Pride, the Mardi Gras. It's full of beautiful, buffed young men revealing as much of their body as they can. It's very much about physical beauty. And so, as we know, that's transitory. And so, as one gets older, I speak for self, have had the sense that, I don't belong in that space because I don't present in the same way. And as Tony alluded to, in regional Queensland, there aren't social groups and networks that older gay men can necessarily link into. And so it can be a bit of an isolating experience. So, yeah, in many ways we're the same, but I think what makes the experience of older gay men different is the fact that what identifies us, or who we are at our core, has been the very thing that our culture has deemed in times gone by either aberrant or unlawful. So in order for us to achieve a healthy sense of self, we've had to work through, the stigma of growing up in that environment. So I think many of us carry shame-based stigma. Even though we may be out and proud, that doesn't mean that history of persecution and the vulnerability, the risk of harm, that doesn't leave one altogether, because it's almost hardwired into one's DNA. So, it was a survival instinct to be invisible. Speaking for self, realizing at a really young age that I didn't have the language to describe it, but I knew I was same-sex attracted. I knew that before I started school. And so, surviving in a school environment was very much about one's invisibility, being in hiding, not revealing who one really is. And I think if you've used invisibility as a survival strategy, whilst you may have kind of left that strategy behind in one's adult life, I think there may be some residual sort of temptation to use that as a strategy as one gets older in the gay community. You just kind of step back from what Tony describes as the commercial scene, the vibrant young gay party culture. You just kind of become invisible. And so I think the challenge for older gay men really is about how do we as a group address that? What can we do to A, acknowledge that invisibility, and B, develop strategies to counter it? So I think, they're my thoughts around why gay men are different. It's that history of gay being othered, and you learn it very early. And I think it's interesting, the occasional homophobic slur in the context of AFL footy or rugby, it doesn't destroy me personally. I don't feel threatened or challenged, but there is some low level sort of disquiet that each episode of that triggers within one. It's a little reminder that whilst I may feel safe in my home and in my immediate environment, there is nevertheless that sort of homophobic energy that isn't too far away. And so, I think that colours who I am and how I live my life. It doesn't dictate how I live my life, but it's there. It's a factor. And I think that's what makes older gay men different, is we've lived having to accommodate and having to adjust who we are to fit in with the environments in which we find ourselves. And so that story of accommodation, rather than having that sort of safety to be ourselves, takes a toll, I think. And but I think it's an opportunity too for us to do some work collectively around how we could address that. And I think one of the things that I spoke to Tony about yesterday was this notion I have that, and it's interesting Kate used the word eldership, because I refer to that in the little piece that I wrote. And it's around, there's an opportunity for older gay men to be elders, safe, wiser, older people, that younger men who are still struggling with their sexuality and still going through the same trials and tribulations as I did and that my peers did around when do you come out to family and who is it safe to come out to? And if dad is a bit of a redneck, how do you navigate that when, there may not be acceptance in the family home and it may not be a safe place if one discloses. It's my sort of theory that there's scope for older gay men to be a source of support to younger men who are struggling. And I just want to say that could easily be framed as a predatory mechanism, a way for old puffs to, hit on younger men. And I don't mean it like that at all. I just think our lived experience should count for something. And it would be wonderful if there was a mechanism where that wisdom and our capacity to support and encourage and just demonstrate that there is a good life to be lived, and that as a younger gay man, that the option of suicide is really and not necessary, because you'll get through it. There is a way through the sort of challenges about acceptance, self-acceptance, working through the trauma, and getting to a place of, a good and rich life. And I think that would be really interesting to explore in the context of gerontonism, just about how can older gay men play an active role in challenging the ageist attitudes in our own community, not in the general community, but in the younger generations of gay men who view older men as not positively, I would say. So I think that's enough. I think I'm rambling, and so I will leave it at that.
James, you were not rambling.
Yeah.
I think.
One thing that,
Yes, Tony.
yeah, just a round up. Part of this whole process for me has been nurturing a little chant, a little affirmation. And as an older gay man, and it applies, I think, to all older people, we have stories to tell, wisdom to share, and a future to cherish. And I'd like to offer that as a bit of an affirmation of who we are and where we can go. Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone.
Beautiful. Thanks.
Good afternoon. Really appreciate the opportunity to share with you today. As an older man myself, it's been an interesting journey. First of all, when I was asked by Catherine if I would do this talk, and she introduced me to that word that we talked about earlier, which I'll say a bit more about a little later myself, the word gerontism. But, I guess being an older person in today's world, it does have some perks. You get senior discounts if you have a cup of coffee at the shop. You can always say, oh, back in my day, we did this, can do that, say that with full authority. You can take a nap without getting any judgment placed upon you because you're having a nap. But the reality is that being an older man has quite a few challenges as well. We can laugh sometimes about forgetting things and asking our grandchildren to help us with our computers and setting up our Wi-Fi systems and so on. But the smiles and the jokes, too many older people feel the heavy burdens of silence and loneliness and the feeling that the world has moved on without them. And tragically, some of those unspoken struggles often end in those same men taking their lives in suicide. And that's why we need to start having these conversations out loud, like we're doing today and yesterday as well, with honesty and with compassion and even with little humor, because laughter opens the door, but it's listening and understanding that keeps people alive. So in the context of what we're talking about with older men and the suicide rate, in the context, it's pretty lousy in Australia. Men aged 85 and older have the highest suicide rates in Australia, 3 times the national average, and yet this issue is largely ignored by our governments and by our general population. Lots of factors make this possible, or that are causes, if you like, behind this trend of older men taking their lives. Sometimes it's because of physical abilities, physical issues that men are facing as they get older, perhaps frailty or chronic pain. And sometimes it's about psychological distress as well. Often older men feel they're no longer needed. They can't do the little jobs that they might have been able to do years ago, or that they become a burden to their family, especially during their significant life transitions as retirement and even losing their independence. When we think about these influences, there's quite a few influences, we can think about from an individual perspective. Many older men often feel inadequate, and they feel emotionally not coping very well because they're grieving losses, but they don't know how to express those losses. And I've been in a few men's groups over the years, and I've seen, and I worked as a social worker doing a lot of counseling, and older men, the men wouldn't come for counseling, but the woman would come and talk about how she feels and what was going on. Men tended not to do that and still don't largely do that. Sometimes in families, there's another factor that influences it from a societal influence, and that is there's a loss of intimacy as you get older. There's a sense of greater loneliness, and the busy adult life of your children, they don't connect so well, particularly with the fathers, and that creates, if you like, further isolation for that person. Sometimes friends and family and other groups, even stereotypes of older men are often seen as stoic. They kind of got all the wisdom and all the knowledge together, but that sometimes really all that does is it deepens the feelings of loneliness and then creates further isolation, unfortunately. Our communities, even the gender norms that we have within our communities, often limit older men's opportunities to discuss their feelings and seek help. And I gave you an example from my counselling days where that was the case. older men I found are also overlooked in various meetings. We had someone speak before about dementia. I'm a carer for my wife who lives with dementia. And over the years that I've been her carer, I've been to many carer meetings. And statistically, I'd always wonder, why is it that the statistics would show that there are more women living with the dementia, but there are not many men carers? Where are all these men? I hadn't met any men who were carers like myself. In the last year or so, I have met quite a few, and that's really quite refreshing to see and to meet these guys, because their journey and their experience is not unsimilar to my own. But that feeling of, can I trust these people? That if I'm in a group with people sharing about my journey with my role as a care partner, how will that go? I think even the government, with the policies that the government have, often ignore the gender perspective, particularly for people as they get older. One of the things I've noticed myself in my own journey in my life is that as you get older, once you get to about 75, you're past your use by date. All of those medical kind of little things that you might have got when you were under 75, they're still available. When I was diagnosed with cancer, prostate cancer, about 2 years ago, and my doctor was telling me all the things that I could do to help myself with it, and he rattled them off, and one of them was surgery. And then he stopped himself and said, "Oh, hang on. No, you're too old for surgery. We couldn't do surgery with you now." So there comes a time when, as a man, an older man, you kind of feel too that you're past your use by date, and there's not much more that they can do for you. And yet that impact that suicide is for men aged 85 is 3 times the national average. Is it any wonder that older men feel that sense? When it comes to support for older men too, it's not there. As a dementia carer, I run a dementia support group in the area where we live in Brisbane. And, we see that we get some men who are care partners to their wives, but they won't open up in the group. They won't talk about how their journey might be or what their struggle might be like, because there's still that stigma that goes along with it. And some of it relates to the topic that we talked about so eloquently earlier on, and that's that gerontism. When Catherine first asked me to kind of be a part of this group today, she sent me a little screen and it had that word gerontism in it, and I'd never heard the word before. So I immediately did my Google search to look up the word and found a variety of meanings, from being derogatory to being, it's just referring to people as they get older, because it's kind of connected to that word geriatric, as you get older. But it got me thinking about it, because when I realized that it's not that, it's kind of more than that, because it has that little word ism in it. And that rattled me. And so one of the things that I like to do when I'm feeling kind of emotionally upcharged about whatever the event might be, and it can be anything, I write poems about all sorts of things, particularly when my emotions are stirred. I decided to write a little poem about gerontism, and I'm going to read that little poem to you now. Gerontism, not a word you hear aloud, but every older body feels it. The smirk, the silence, the shove to the margins. Gerontism, it cuts through all who age, but in men it hides deeper. Behind jokes, behind pride, behind the command to man up. It shouts stereotype, emotional prejudice, and behavioral discrimination. It's an age when blood pressure rises, cancers loom, bones become fragile, and memory fades. Yet still men are told, don't speak, don't feel, don't show the weight you carry. So bottles replace voices, pills substitute for touch, and loneliness does the rest. This is not frailty. This is erasure, the quiet killing of worth. All the isms breed schisms, racism, sexism, classism. But gerontism, this slow erasure of folk in age, is the one we refuse to name. Gerontism must be named, called out, dismantled, because everyone who ages deserves more than silence, deserves dignity, deserves to be written in, not cast out. Thank you.
My name is Renee. At 87 years of age, I'm certainly classifiable as an older woman, but it is not necessarily a classification through which I feel myself. In my long life, I have weathered many shifts in the social fabric of society. I have always been committed to principles of social justice, truth, and a universal humanity. I was born in Ireland, where I lived until finishing secondary school, after which time I worked in London. My day jobs were in office financial settings. The top-up jobs on evenings or weekends were in entertainment and hospitality. In spite of financial constraints, life was full of youthful energy, adventure, and anticipation in a beautiful city. After marriage, my new husband expressed a desire to live in a warmer climate. So we migrated to Australia, sadly without having done much research into what to expect. With the arrival of our first child, I felt that coming was a big mistake, although the weather was better and the beach was free. There were very cloud-minded facilities. If you could find one, the fees were very high, and most employers would not employ married women. Women in government jobs had to retire in marriage. I eventually found a child-minded place and applied for a job, citing that we had no children. I got a good job, but children get sick, so this situation eventually became untenable. We reverted to existing on one wage, and the family grew. With small children, it was almost impossible to work, so short-term jobs were taken up when things got very tight. A night shift in a battery factory introduced me to the unique challenges that faced newly arrived women in Australia from non-English-speaking backgrounds. My weekend stint at a fish and chip shop netted me $1 an hour. Due to the burgeoning population of migrants that built Australia after World War II, there was a dramatic teacher shortage. The Victorian state government had a teaching studentship scheme, which was an indentured scholarship requiring people to work in a government school for 3 years after graduation. I was fortunate to get one based on my Irish education's credentials. I was over the moon. I could now spend long summer breaks with my kids, mostly on the local beach. Coming from a large family and having a large family of my own, self-sufficiency and hard work have been driving forces in my life. Never has life been easy, but it has always been enjoyable. Financial management was always a juggling act, especially before I was able to graduate and undertake full-time work. After 4 years of study, I became a graduate in education, which opened a career spanning teaching, education planning, research and development, equal opportunity and community development, and included opportunities for further study along the way. My full-time work took a toll on our relationship. So after 23 years of marriage, we divorced. Divorce with dependent children was probably the first time I recognized the financial bias against women in society, even though equal pay for equal work had never been on the agenda. Banks would not loan money to women unless it was a personal loan with horrific interest rates. I was faced with losing the mortgaged house to obtain a financial settlement with my ex-husband. It was at the time when teachers' unions formed a credit union to help their members. Assured of credit union help, I sold the house and we bought a smaller house closer to the city and public transport. Unfortunately, it was further from the beach. Coincidentally, legislation was enacted to allow women to join superannuation, which had previously been confined to men only. Paying the premiums on top of the mortgage, and it was a tight fit, but we did it. I knew then that I could make this work on my own. Trying to pursue a career path as a woman was not easy. Almost all senior roles were in the hands of men, and often competence was not the criteria by which they ascended to these roles. Jobs for the boys operated in highly fertile ground. Opportunities for women presented when agitation for a more enlightened public discourse led to recognition that equal opportunity needed addressing, especially in education. It was addressed through federal education funding. Jobs opened in research to inform the new government policy-making initiatives. As a teacher, I had been a pioneer in integration of students with disabilities into mainstream schools at secondary level. Based on this experience, I applied for and got one of the jobs. By then, all but one of my children had finished school and embarked on their own careers. At last, I could breathe. It was only in hindsight that I recognized the hurdles society had placed in my path. Like a lobster in a pot, I addressed each immediate issue as it presented itself. I had little contact with women in similar positions to my own and put it all down to bad management on my part. The list of shouldn't haves was endless. It was only through tertiary study and involvement in research that I was able to translate my experiences from the micro to the macro level and recognize them as systemic issues. This understanding continues to be invaluable as I navigate my later life. I would also, before I finish, just like to draw attention to some of the beautiful things said by James. He mentioned fitting in with the environment in which we find ourselves. And I guess that's something that I've always done as a migrant, and as an Irish person in Australia during the Troubles, and as a mum, and as a divorced mother, and all the other things. And I guess in some respects, getting old has been a bit of a breeze because I feel that I've jumped all the hurdles already and now I can relax and enjoy myself. Thank you.
I was really struck with how you said towards the end that it is with hindsight that you understand that the hurdles placed in your path were systemic, not a failure, I think, on your behalf. And I would really like to ask, if I may, why do you think it is only with hindsight that you are able to see that?
Well, I think that's why I drew the parallel with the lobster in the pot, because when you're sort of being boiled alive, so to speak, all you do is sort of concentrate and try to get out of the immediate situation. I was fortunate to have spent a number of years doing action research in the community. You know, you've got to do good action research before you can start isolating issues, etc. And especially in the field of people with disabilities, I interviewed over 100 families who had children with disabilities and who came from non-English speaking backgrounds. And the parallels that we had in our lives were just they were just kind of drew you together and bonded you together, and it also helped you to sort of analyze that all these things were actually systemic, and whether you look at young people today or older people today, or all the speakers who spoke about their own lives and Dubhg and his family experiences. We work in isolation for a lot of our lives, but it's only when we get to that stage where we've got the luxury of being able to analyze them that we realize that it's not just our experience.
What a wonderful session we've been joined together in the last couple of days. I guess I'd like to share some insight from this one trans woman. You mentioned before that we can all only share our living experiences as distinct from claiming to represent everyone in a much larger cohort. So I know from groups of people that I'm associated with, many trans and gender diverse people have got poorer health and also well-being, including mental well-being, because of transphobia. And this is being enhanced, sadly, from some countries around the world of recent times. Transphobia can be exhausting and all-consuming. And the issue with DEI generally, diversity, equity and inclusion principles are so important, and yet they're being so undervalued by those that would wish to use the discussion for political purposes. So sometimes it's hard to fight ageism when there's such this complexity in our social fabric these days. It's something that, of course, that we have to learn, that we have to draw deeper resources from ourselves. We have to learn to trust ourselves and trust our inner spirit that is part of the whole discussion. I'm sorry, I've just had an interruption. Now we're back. So transphobia does take its toll, not only on me, but on my sisters and brothers and others. And yet, when I finally had to come to the discussion in this context, I had to realize that when at a late stage in life, I found that I had to ethically, morally go through the transition process. And transition goes on for many of us in many ways, whether it be transition into older age, or whether it's transition in accommodation or care facilities. So when I had to pick up Kathy as my living experience, I was riven by the fact of the loss of my male privilege from a previous life. And yet although I am now living my version of life, there is from time to time duality where I build on the experience of earlier stages in my life, and yet I rejoice in the fact that I've got this living experience of the person I am today. And the families involved and the communities involved are all facets that I might touch on very slightly later on. People that are concerned about transphobia often focus on the younger people, and those over 20 are likely to find themselves more and more invisible. And we're talking about how as we age, there are facets of invisibility that drift down upon us like a fog from the world. So, the public can see young trans people and their critical fight for survival, and we all celebrate the fantastic advocates that are working to ensure that the safety of young folk. But older people are here too. I'm older, and there are many others that haven't been able to step up. Step up. Isn't that interesting? That sounds like criticism, and that's not what I'm talking about. The ability to be able to control your visibility in community is absolutely critical. So for the empowered folk that are able to share, it's really, really important. So ageism, is it important to us? To me? Sure is. Do I feel the effects? Do I see it in society? Am I invisible as an older person as I limp down the street with my walking stick some days? Sure. But I have to celebrate the fact that I'm here still. And I'm just bursting with pride that there are people in community that care about others, that understand intersectionality, that can push for the sharing of respect and communication in this world where there are too many voices shouting that we may or may not have a right to a life. Guess what? I'm claiming my life, and I'm claiming the life on behalf of all others that are facing the questions about gender and the actual stages of recognition of gender. So societal influence. How is it experienced? Well, right now, I've just turned 78, and when I'm with a group of folk like yourselves, sometimes I feel 58. It's amazing to see how we can all lift up others in an intersectional way. My future's not as I would have visualized or hoped it might have been at various stages in my life. But right now, I am looking forward to every day that I get, and every day that I can share with others, because sharing with others is really what the fabric of community is all about. So although I'm not a glamorous looking person, although I don't live the high life, although I don't tour the world on a daily basis, just having the relationships of family, knowing and understanding that even my coming out at age 62 was traumatizing in a number of aspects for them. I know they love and care for me. What bigger prize can we get in life than to have caring friends or family? So this impacts on the way I view my aging, and I guess it's fairly visible to yourselves. I'm an authentic version of me, and all of us are, and we can only see our lives with clarity when we look through the lens that we all individually have. And that lens is not transferable to anyone else, anyone other than the 8.7 billion people in the world. We all have our own lens. And we have to treasure that, and we have to trust us. Now, there's been discussions about some people resenting old age. My gosh, it's a privilege. I see some of the film stars and the rock stars in the international lights closing out their lives and their contributions. And I say, how lucky am I? I know I need to invest in my body and invest in my mental health as I grow older, because there are some bits of rust happening here and there. but really, it is just a joy to know that my broader community of the LGBTIQ community, my broader community of the people in Wellington, in Gippsland, and all these other communities that I am part of, we're all striving to do the best we can. So trying to keep healthy. My local pool was just reopened after 2 years, and I'm looking forward next week to being able to go to the pool and start doing laps again. And that's a privilege. So many places in this world don't have that sort of privilege. So in my steps through life, learning about who I really am and learning about the concept of transitioning and learning the fact that we are all transitioning every day throughout our lives as we adjust to the massively different facets that affect us in the social fabric.